Hi, and welcome to IoD Insights today, where we touch on ideas that help today's business leaders govern more effectively and more responsibly. I'm Jenny Wolf, and I'm glad that you're here with us. Today's episode focuses on a critical topic that often gets a little less attention than it deserves, and that's risk management, the basics of risk management. Because obviously, we're not going to learn everything we need to know about risk in 15 to 20 minutes, not in a podcast, not even in an all-day seminar. But what we can do is get us together thinking. We'll highlight a few concepts and ideas and point you to resources if you want to go a little bit deeper. You'll find related materials on our website and our YouTube channel. And don't forget, Camo ID regularly hosts webinars, workshops, and of course, our Signature Certified Directors course, which delves much deeper into this topic as we go along. All of these are designed to help us all be better leaders. With us today is a great leader, Mr. Dave Thomas. He joins us with more than 30 years of experience in financial services industry across the Asia Pacific region. He's made significant contributions to risk management, governance, corporate governance, good governance, and strategy, with a particular focus on building resilient financial institutions. But the principles are relevant to any industry of any size, not just to financial institutions. Dave has held senior banking positions in many financial hubs, including Singapore, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Malaysia, and now Cambodia. So he has a wealth of experience and wisdom to share with us today. Dave, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So I thought maybe let's just start with some quick basics, almost a checklist, if you will, for the purposes of this conversation. And so when you are working with companies, and you've worked with some of the biggest banks in the world, when you're doing a comprehensive risk assessment for an organization, what categories of risk should be on the table for anyone who's undertaking this experiment?
Sure. So I think the first thing, just very briefly, is to make sure that when you go through this process in a company, a financial institution, whatever, is let's all define what is risk, because everyone's got a very different perspective of what risk is. So let me just very briefly define what I think is a generic definition. But those are events or conditions that could negatively or positively impact the achievement of business goals. So this could be, and I'll go into more detail, disruption of processes, financial loss, reputational damage, legal exposure. The two important things that I think I just said is it could be negative or positive. So risk is not always a negative connotation. We need to think of it both defensively and offensively, which I'll talk about later. And we also talked about alignment to business goals. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. But when you kind of set the table of risk and you'll look at what do you want to talk about, every organization is a little bit unique, but these are, I'd say, the high level business risk types that reside in any kind of business, maybe banking, manufacturing, et cetera. Strategic risk. So this is a loss because of poor execution or strategic decisioning. Could be also just implementation is done poorly. This is an underplayed risk in my mind. Operational risk occurs quite a bit. Loss from inadequate or failed internal processes or controls. People, systems, or events occur that have failed. Financial risk, which you read in the newspaper all the time, is a result from loss or financial instability due to variables such as credit risk, currency risk, market risk, or liquidity risk. And I know that's a lot, but generally speaking, this either runs through the profit and loss statement of the company or through the balance sheet of the company and impacts them negatively. Fourth would be compliance and legal risk. This is loss of normally reputational damage due to violation of legal laws, regulations, etc. More importantly, it could also result in fines, which again goes to financial risk. Last two are reputational risk. And again, I think a lot of Cambodian companies underplay this. This is due to loss due to damage of the company's reputation, brand, or public perception. And this is so relevant in a time when social media plays such an important part of how a company's positioned in the marketplace. A company's reputation can be ruined in minutes via social media. Last one is emerging risks. These are
Sure.
evolving risks that are hard to quantify but need to be understood because they're coming. So those are, again, the risks I talk about: strategic risk, operational risk, financial risk, compliance and legal risk, reputational risk, and emerging risk.
Yeah, and obviously we could do deep dive for hours on each of those, and I know that at the end we'll be providing some resources for people who want to dig more deeply. But let's go to something that I've heard you do that at the end of a presentation on risk, but I want to flip that around some. Explain to us about the iceberg syndrome in risk management, and why does that matter?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting concept, which was researched in Japan initially and then kind of taken across the world. The concept is that the senior management in a company is often very unaware of the majority of risk occurring at lower levels of the company. And of course, most of the risk is happening at lower levels of the company. So the study basically said that top management basically understands 4% of the problems in the company, middle management about 9%. The team leaders lower down in the organization understand 74% of the problems and risks in the company. And the frontliners actually understand 100% of the problems. So the concept is the iceberg at the very top actually understands, which is the board, senior management, actually understands very little of what's happening in the day-to-day risk positioning of the company.
Yeah, and from the IOD, from the Institute of Directors perspective, obviously, that says a lot about the need for the board directors and the C-suite to basically maybe spend a little time with the frontline people and hear a little more. And I'm sure that's more complicated than it sounds, but again, that's something we can dig into other more intense conversations on this topic. But I want to go a little bit further with the iceberg image, kind of the things unseen. From your experience, what are the types of risks most often overlooked by boards or executive teams, in addition to the iceberg syndrome?
Sure. So, the question is it overlooked or is it not disclosed and escalated to the right level? So when we look at the iceberg effect, it doesn't imply the top management's not doing its job. That's what one would imply. But in reality, I think it's just the fundamental of a cultural issue, which I think we'll talk about in just a minute. But generally speaking, the question is, are these risks being elevated to senior management and the board in a way that they can understand and act upon? More importantly, as I said in my longer presentation, the question is deeper down in the organization, they're dealing with these risks, and have they been given the authority to make decisions around these risks by the board? So it's kind of a two-way street. It's not just senior management or top management's fault for not knowing. It could be a case where it's not being escalated properly to deal with. So you asked about kind of the risks that, all that said, what are some of the risks that are kind of underplayed or may not be as dealt with more transparently at the board and senior management level? And I would say the first one is always strategic risk. So often, particularly in a market like Cambodia and in Southeast Asia, you typically have a very, very strong leader, maybe an owner operator, chairman of the board. And so when they want to go down a path, they go down the path because it's their capital, right? And I think that it's difficult at times for people in the organization or even the board to kind of say, let's really assess this strategically and decide if this is the right way the company should go. So I do want to say, though, that let's look at this positively. There's been many great stories where very difficult decisions had to be made strategically. We look at Apple, and the example I've given is they used to only have a device that basically played music, an iPod. That was, 15 years ago. That's what they did. They didn't produce an iPhone, but they realized that if they didn't transition to the phone, which is where music was going to be played in the future, they'd be out of business. So this strategic conversation can be very important for the direction of the company. The second is operational risk, and people at the board level, more to your point, is should board go down to the management level and kind of understand the working level, what's going on? There's two answers I have to that. I think it's very useful for a board member, and I've been a board member and I've been senior management, to actually go down and actually understand what are the business flows. You don't need to understand that nitty gritty, but if 100% of the people in the field, sorry, at the working level, understand the risks, why not talk to them, right? Why not ask them, what are the bottlenecks? What are the issues? So I think that's useful. Concurrently, I think it's really important that there's an escalation process that occurs. It's very clear that if there's an issue at the working level, they quickly escalate it to senior management to make a decision, or the board. So, for example, if this is going to damage your reputation, if it's going to have major financial loss, you would have a framework that defines that. That says at a certain dollar level, the board wants to know. If we've broken the law, the board wants to know. If we breached a regulation, we want to know. If we're going to have downtime that affects our customers more than X hours, we want to know. And so operational risk is a big topic a lot of boards and senior management spend time on. Lastly, on this topic, and again, it could be a whole webinar on this, but who is the first, second, and third line of defense? Who actually is managing? Who's responsible for risk in the company? The last couple of things I would say is I think that reputational risk is underplayed in a market like Cambodia. I don't think people deal with it appropriately. I think the consumer actually takes a lot of pain from the companies. You often see, for example, in banking, mobile apps go down for hours, days. That's really intolerable given the fact that it's a primary source of payment for the economy. And then lastly, emerging risks. Again, our boards in Cambodia, our senior management in Cambodia, assess the impacts of tariffs and the Trump administration on their business. It definitely touches the entire economy, right? That's an emerging risk. And boards and senior management should proactively, as of February this year, be discussing that and understanding what are the financial impacts, how does it impact our business model, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the ones that I think are de-emphasized, or not, I should say, not emphasized enough when you're talking at the level and senior management levels.
Well, I do know that the whole tariff issue it's been a little bit all-consuming among many people, and so hopefully, we'll see how that all pans out, and that it ends up that Cambodia prospers in the long term, regardless of what happens with the tariffs on that front. But you're exactly right. It is something that is having a huge impact on the economy and the future of our economy here in Cambodia. But I want to talk. We talked about. One, know if the law has been broken, the regulation has been breached. If there's something that is affecting reputation, no matter what that might be, we want to know. So that's about setting policies, but isn't this also not just about the policies that are established? I mean, it's got a lot to do with individual judgment, kind of awareness. As you just mentioned a minute ago, the actual culture of not just of the organization, but of the community, the country, and also a little bit of the fear factor. And how should leaders in the C-suite and aspiring C-suite and aspiring board members, how should they learn to shift their thinking from just checking the box and say we have these policies to actually owning the risk?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I've struggled with this in many organizations. And my first recommendation is people often think of risk, as I said before, defensively, and they think of it completely separate from the business. I mean, they kind of think of it as something we have to do, as you said, kind of check the boxes. So first, let's talk about the first topic, defensively. Look, you as I said before, you can't win a football game playing defense. Right? Risk is something a business takes, and they get rewarded for it. Okay. You cannot be in business and not take some level of risk. It's impossible to make a profit. Right. So we take risk.
Right.
Are we playing offense and defense? If we're just playing offense, we're probably not going to be in business very long. If we're being defense for very long, we're also not playing, and we're probably not in business. So first, the mindset needs to change. It's not a bad thing we need to be scared of. The second thing is, and critical, is the risk appetite, or how much risk we want to take, needs to be aligned to the strategic plan, which is discussed at the board level. We have goal setting, we have strategic plans annually, which is typically multi-year. How much risk are we willing to take based on the board's comments to meet that strategic objective, right? And that can be including strategic risk. It can include financial risk. It can include credit risk, right? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, sure.
If that's not done, it's impossible to build a culture, because the people in the company don't know how much risk. So you're leaving it to individual judgment to decide. It's the board's responsibility to set those parameters at a very detailed level. Okay. So how do you communicate that into the organization? How do you get that passed down? And I think the best way to do that is via dashboard. So we set a series of risk parameters. Okay. And the first ones I would say is macroeconomic. So we've made an assumption based on our budget, based on the economy of X. If that changes throughout the year, we should monitor that quickly, because if it goes worse, the economy gets worse,
Yeah.
our risk appetite won't be the same. The second thing is all the risk factors we just talked about, strategic, which can be broken down, into smaller details, financial, many details that you could break it down to, subcategories. All those risk types I talked about can be broken into a dashboard, and risk appetite set, red, amber, green, quantified. Our appetite for regulatory breaches should be 0, right? So it's either red or green, right? Our appetite legal risk or regulatory fines, maybe we have a small amount we agree to, but other than that, it's red, right? So I think once you start quantifying your risk appetite, aligning it to the budget, and you start triggering red and amber for sure throughout the year, every month you report this, people start jumping around. People start noticing, oh, this is important. I own this. The board is calling me up. And so I think this is how you build culture, right? Now, it's not necessarily negative, because if you're green, you're doing the right thing, right? You're being rewarded for doing the right thing. The last thing I want to say about this on risk appetite is it can't be all backward looking. You have to have some forward looking indicators based on the trend of where we're going. We'll run out of capital in the next 3 months, or our capital is going to be very tight based on kind of a stress test. Or if tariffs hit us at 30%, not 40+%, we're going to have a problem with sales, our margins, right? So a few of these indicators need to be forward looking to provide the board insights, because otherwise you're just looking at the rear view mirror. You're driving the car, but everything's behind you. But what about what's in front of you? So again, the management needs to be on its front foot on this. So I think that's dashboarding. I'm a big fan of setting appetite and forcing the board to quantify how much risk we're willing to take. It is the best way. Just a few other kind of cleanup items here, and you can tell I'm kind of passionate about this because I think it's important.
That's why we're glad you're here with us. Yeah.
Is risk must be part of the business decision-making process. So if you're expanding a business line, introducing a new product, going into a new country, risk has to be at the table, right? It has to help quantify, hey, here's the business opportunity, that's the revenue part, and here's the risk. Mm-hmm. Okay, how do we balance those two to come to the right outcome we want? Second is KPIs, performance indicators, need to be aligned to that. So you can't say all the risk guys or the second line of defense guys have all the risk KPIs, and the first line of defense doesn't have any. I'm generating the business, but I don't own the risk. That's impossible, right? Risk and reward follow each other. Anyone who takes risk gets reward, right? You can't say I get the revenue, but I have no responsibility for the risk. That's impossible. The company will be, bankrupt. Escalation process has to be very, very quick and efficient, because again, in a culture like Cambodia, people tend to not want to escalate things because they're going to get, they're going to be punished or criticized for it. But you just have to create a culture where you're going to learn. And through these mistakes, we learn and improve. And lastly, I think, the risk team needs to change the narrative from I'm always punishing you, you're always doing the wrong thing, to, hey, look, we're doing some things right, and we've got some areas for improvement, and some things, hey, aren't acceptable, right? Some things we've done, we've had a regulatory fine, or someone broke the law, we had fraud, those are unacceptable. There's no, it's okay, let's learn from this. You know, of course, the organization can learn from it, but the person cannot. The person has to be fired, right? If you have fraud, right? But I think it's important the risk team plays this very careful role of offense, defense, negative, positive coach through the process.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Dave, we're getting near to the end of our time, but you know, in my conversations with you over time, you have some great stories. And I don't want to embarrass you, but one of my favorites, I think you know what's coming, is when you were so many moons ago, early in your career when you were with the Bank of America. And tell me what happened with that little coffee shop.
Yeah, so this is going along the lines of kind of risk appetite and understanding risk. As a junior account officer living in Seattle, Washington, there was a coffee startup that was opening kind of a gourmet coffee shop actually in our headquarter building. And at that point, back then, everyone just drank free coffee out of styrofoam cups from the company coffee machine, right? And you poured,
Yeah, I remember that.
yeah, awful, powdered
Creamer.
creamer.
Yeah. The
Or you drink
creamer.
Nescafe, right? Anyway,
Oh,
this company came and they pitched this idea of it's not just, we're not just selling coffee, we're selling an environment, an experience. And I thought it was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. You're like, who's going to pay a premium for coffee when you can get it free? Of course, that company ended up being Starbucks. And so it just goes to show you kind of your risk appetite and your orientation at that point. I didn't understand the whole theory there. And maybe that was a right call at the time, but clearly that company has done phenomenally well and gone global over the last 35 plus years. Lessons learned.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Several just in my neighborhood here in Phnom Penh. Yeah.
so of course.
So, before we close, I do want to ask you, is there anything in particular that you would recommend to someone who's new to risk governance? Where should they start? Are there any books or articles or habits even that you highly recommend that they might take advantage of? We can post them on our website, make it easy for people to access.
Yeah. So first of all, the Institute of Banking and Finance, Cambodia, provides a lot of free courses, both in English and in Khmer. Some of the courses do cost money. For example, I spoke on operational risk about a month ago. I think they charge a small amount for that. And these are typically 2-day courses, but they also offer some webinars. And again, they're not all risk management focused, but there's a lot of really good risk content and relevant content in the Cambodian Institute of Banking and Finance. In terms of just publications, PwC and Deloitte, the international accounting firms, have on their website a lot of free publications, yes, including a director's checklist, which is often relevant for people who are new directors wanting to deal with risk. Third on my mind is LinkedIn has a lot of great topic seminars, courses that are free of charge or may cost very little money that are worth kind of looking along. There's a podcast called Mastering of Risk Management, which is free. And they have a lot of interesting speakers. And there's many other, once you hit that one, you'll see others that may kind of prompt you like the speaker better or the topics better that may prompt people to look into. I have to say that there's a lot of certification programs, international certification programs, but I really won't touch upon those because one, they're very expensive. And I think if you're just starting out, you can get a lot free of charge or with very little money by kind of noodling around here before you kind of jump into these international programs, which are, like I said, quite expensive. Lastly, if you're a director or senior management and you don't understand risk, there's actually people in your company who are probably more than happy to provide you a quick seminar. And I think that's very fair as a director saying, hey, I'd really like to understand the terminology you use in operational risk. I'd like to understand the framework better that you guys used, the escalation process for all. There's no lack of shame of going down to the operating level where they know the risk to say, hey, I wanted 2 hours, please brief me. I think it's very fair to do.
Absolutely.
So
great idea.
Those are some of my suggestions for that.
Thanks, and we'll post those on our website, in our resource library online so that people
Right.
can have easy access to them. Thanks for that. Dave, thank you as always for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us, even in a nutshell like today. I
Right.
think it's really, really interesting and helpful. It's really, really helpful to stay on top of these issues and to learn more. And to that end, obviously, as I mentioned at the top of this video, is don't forget that we do have on monthly webinars at the Cambodian Institute of Directors. They're free of charge. As long as you have access to the internet, you can join. You can sign up on Facebook or on LinkedIn, or just drop us a line through our website. And the other is we have regular workshops, which are half day, which delve much more deeply into topics. Again, you're not going to learn everything there is to know about a certain topic that's taken people like Dave, 30 years to get to where they are in terms of experience and knowledge, but it's a great start. And then there is, once again, our flagship offering, the Certified Directors Course, which is basically a 9-month commitment for current and aspiring board directors, so that really gives you intense learning on all of the topics that you need to be aware of, from risk to finances to leadership. What are the skills that you need in order to be an effective leader? So all of those things we offer, we're always open for ideas too, and always are grateful to you for joining us. So we'll see you next
Thanks,
time.
Jenny. Thank
Thank
you.
you.